As threats to sanction Russia's oligarchs intensify, Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich said he would sell Chelsea Football Club after 19 years, promising to donate money from the sale to help victims of the war in Ukraine. The metals magnate said in a statement Wednesday that a sale was in the best interest of the reigning European and world soccer champions. The announcement comes as Russian billionaires come under intensifying pressure. Earlier in the day, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson declined to comment on whether Britain would impose sanctions on Abramovich, but said the vice was tightening on those around Russian President Vladimir Putin. And in the U.S., Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced further efforts to sanction Russia's elite.
We and our allies and partners are launching a task force to identify, track down, and freeze the assets of sanctioned Russian companies and oligarchs. We will freeze and seize their yachts, their private jets, their opulent estates in world capitals.
Swiss business tycoon Hans-Jörg Weiss told a newspaper that he was considering buying Chelsea from Abramovich, saying Abramovich wanted to get rid of Chelsea quickly and was trying to sell his villas in England as well. Abramovich bought the West London club in 2003 for a reported £140 million, an investment that led to the most successful era in the team's history. The 55-year-old, who has Israeli and Portuguese citizenship, became one of Russia's most powerful businessmen by earning fortunes after the 1991 breakup of the Soviet Union. Forbes has put his net worth at $13.3 billion.
I'm inclined to propose and support a 25 basis point rate hike.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell told lawmakers he would back a 25 basis point rate hike in March, and is prepared to go even higher if inflation doesn't subside in the U.S. as fast as expected.
Those of us on the committee have an expectation that inflation will peak and begin to come down this year. And to the extent inflation comes in higher or is more persistently high than that, then we would be prepared to move more aggressively by raising the federal funds rate by more than 25 basis points at a meeting or meetings.
In his testimony before a House panel Wednesday, Powell reiterated the core Fed narrative that high inflation, which is running at about 3 times the central bank's 2% target, and an extremely tight labor market warrant higher interest rates. But Powell admitted that the central bank's plan has been complicated by the outbreak of war in Ukraine, raising a host of new risks, from even higher inflation to slower growth and the possibility of stress in financial markets should the conflict broaden or conditions deteriorate.
The ultimate economic effects of the war and all of the sanctions and events yet to come are just very highly uncertain, and we need to understand that.
The Fed slashed rates in 2020 to blunt the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. But there is now broad agreement that the current level of borrowing costs is out of step with an economy that has rebounded faster than expected from the crisis. The Fed chair told lawmakers that the coronavirus pandemic's impact on the economy finally appeared to be easing, and that hiring remains strong and inflation remains a chief risk.
Last weekend, as you saw, President Putin directed a special alert of Russian nuclear forces. Now, in this time of heightened tensions, the United States and other members of the international community rightly saw this as a dangerous and irresponsible, and as I've said before, an unnecessary step. Both the United States and Russia have long agreed that nuclear employment could have devastating consequences. And we both agreed, most recently this year, in the context of the P5 statement, that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The United States has not taken any similar steps. And so in an effort to demonstrate that we have no intention in engaging in any actions that could be misunderstood or misconstrued, the Secretary of Defense has directed that our Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile test launch, scheduled for this week, to be postponed. Now, we did not take this decision lightly, but instead to demonstrate that we are a responsible nuclear power. This is not a step backwards in our readiness, nor does it imply that we will necessarily cancel other routine activities to ensure a credible nuclear capability. We remain confident in our strategic posture, as we've said before, and our ability to defend the homeland and our allies and our partners remains fully intact and ready.
Today, we call on Russia to stop its unprovoked, unjustified, unconscionable war.
In an historic meeting, the United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to reprimand Russia for invading Ukraine and demanded that Moscow stop fighting and withdraw its military forces.
The General Assembly has spoken.
The resolution Wednesday was supported by 141 of the Assembly's 193 members and passed in a rare emergency session called by the UN Security Council, as Ukrainian forces battle to defend itself in the face of a Russian invasion that has forced hundreds of thousands to flee. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
First of all, to put the vote in the UN in perspective, it is both overwhelming and I would even say historic. Go back to 2014 when the General Assembly pronounced itself on Russia's initial aggression against Ukraine. The votes in favor of that resolution were 100.
The last time the Security Council convened an emergency session of the General Assembly was in 1982. U.S. Ambassador to the UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield called it an extraordinary moment and urged members to hold Moscow accountable for its violations of international law.
If the United Nations has any purpose, it is to prevent war. It is to condemn war, to stop war. That is our job here today. It is the job you were sent here to do, not just by your capitals, but by all of humanity.
She accused Russia of using weapons that violate international laws, including cluster munitions and vacuum bombs. Russia's UN envoy denied Moscow was targeting civilians and accused Western governments of pressuring Assembly members to pass the resolution. Russia was joined by Belarus, which has served as a launch pad for Russian invasion forces, Eritrea, North Korea, and Syria in voting against the resolution. 35 members abstained, including China.
Wall Street ended sharply higher on Wednesday after Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell signaled the central bank would likely not raise interest rates as high as some investors had feared. In testimony to the House Financial Services Committee, Powell said he is inclined to support a 25 basis point rate hike in March, quelling some concerns about the potential for a more aggressive hike. James Bruderman is vice chairman of 1879 Advisors.
With Powell's testimony today, what the markets are taking away is that Powell's got his pulse on where we are both in the economy and on the geopolitical front, that he's supporting 1/4 basis point increase and not 1/2 basis point like a lot of hawks were calling for, suggests that he's going to be nimble in his approach to sopping up the outstanding liquidity in the markets.
The Dow rose 1.8%, the S&P 500 gained 1.9%, while the Nasdaq climbed 1.6%. Powell's comments helped calm investors after Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent markets into a tailspin. Energy shares resumed their march higher, with the S&P 500 Energy Index rallying 2.2% as Brent crude jumped to near 8-year highs. In individual movers, Apple ended 2% higher after announcing a product launch for March 8th, when it's expected to promote a low-cost version of its popular iPhone with 5G. And Nordstrom surged 38% after the department store chain forecast upbeat full-year revenue and profit.